My sister and I were reborn at the same time. This time, however, she made a different choice. She happily gave me her gloomy and possessive wealthy husband, the one she had been saddled with in our past life, and chose to marry into the newly bankrupt family of Julian. She thought she was cursing me. Sister, she'd whispered, a cruel smirk on her face. It's your turn to taste life with a pervert. I suppose she thought I'd be miserable. But later, as the man she despised snuggled against me in our bed, murmuring, "Wife, love me more," I had to wonder about her definition of suffering. He gave me a 3 million yuan allowance every month, so what if he was a little clingy? What was so wrong with that? The moment I opened my eyes to this new life, the first thing I heard was my sister Clara making a scene about marrying into Julian's family. I knew then that she had been reborn, just like me. My parents' faces immediately showed their concern. They had always loved Clara more, even though I was only a year older. I was always the one who had to give in. The Julian family has just gone bankrupt, my mother said, her voice gentle with worry for her favorite daughter. You'll have a hard time if you marry him. Let your sister go. She's older and more sensible. When Clara saw their opposition, she immediately burst into tears, threatening to starve herself if she didn't get her way. It was a familiar tactic, and as always, it worked. My parents couldn't stand to see her upset and finally relented. My mother then turned to me, her tone instantly cold and dismissive. You should be grateful to your sister in the future. I just nodded silently. I was expected to be grateful for something she had thrown away like trash. As Clara walked past me, she couldn't resist a final jab whispering about the pervert I was now stuck with. I just smiled back at her. Did she honestly believe that life with the bankrupt Julian family would be easy? A lack of money is the root of all kinds of misery. In our previous life, when faced with the same choice, Clara hadn't hesitated for a second to choose the incredibly wealthy Arthur's family. She dreamed of a lavish, happy life as a rich man's wife, leaving me to clean up the mess of Julian's failing family. What she didn't know was that Arthur, the man she married, was a deeply troubled and possessive person. On their wedding day, he warned her to be a good wife and abandon any foolish ideas, and she later found him harming himself in his study. Terrified, Clara tried to run away, but his bodyguards caught her and locked her in the house. She eventually eloped with another man, and when Arthur found her, their marriage ended in a scandalous divorce that left her disgraced. Meanwhile, my life took a different path. With the support of my husband, Julian, I started my own business from nothing and became a respected female entrepreneur. Julian would often say, a modern woman should create her own value, not rely on a man to live. He was praised for his supportive nature, and I became the envy of all the wealthy wives in our circle. But that idyllic life didn't last. At a family banquet, Clara invited me to her room where she set a fire, determined to die and take me with her. As the flames consumed us, she held onto my leg with a terrifying grip, her face contorted with hate. I've always been better than you, she screamed. Why are you the one living a better life? If I die, you're coming with me. The searing pain of the fire is a memory that still makes me shudder. So now, in this new life, looking at Clara's smug, confident expression, I could only shake my head. She had no idea that the Julian family's comeback in our previous life was entirely because of my efforts. My wedding was scheduled for the day before hers. In the days leading up to it, Clara constantly bragged about how wonderful Julian was to her, how he was so caring and attentive. In stark contrast, Arthur hadn't visited me even once. I couldn't help but smile whenever she told me these things. With his family bankrupt, what else could Julian offer besides being nice? When a man decides to be good to you, you're the moon and the stars. When he doesn't, you're just dirt on the ground. Arthur's family, on the other hand, was much more practical. They had already sent over countless lavish engagement gifts. At my insistence, my parents reluctantly agreed to let some of those gifts be part of my dowry. The marriage alliance with Arthur's family had been arranged by my family to elevate our own business. As for Julian's family, there was a long-standing engagement from our childhood, back when their family was still our social equal. Now that they were bankrupt, my father felt obligated to honor the agreement to avoid being seen as a snob. On my wedding day, I finally saw Arthur. He was tall and imposing, with a straight, high nose and gold-rimmed glasses that gave him an air of cold solemnity. He showed no outward sign of being the kind of person who would self-harm. When the officiant announced that the groom could kiss the bride, I was so lost in thought that I instinctively took a step back. Arthur's hand tightened around my waist, pulling me firmly against his chest, and his cool lips pressed against mine. Later that night, he sat on the sofa, his tie loosened and his shirt unbuttoned, revealing a glimpse of a well-muscled chest. It was then that I saw the first hint of that clinginess my sister had talked about. He suddenly reached out, tilting my chin up with his fingers and leaning down to look directly into my eyes, which had darkened slightly. "Your family begged for this marriage," he said, his voice low and intense. "Now that you're here, get rid of any foolish thoughts. I'll give you 3 million yen a month. All you have to do is play the part of Mrs. Arthur in public. Don't do anything else. I don't like it when other people covet what's mine. If you disobey me, I can't guarantee what I might do." Before he could finish his speech, I reached up, pulled his tie down, and kissed him. I had been sneaking glances at the sliver of chest visible through his shirt, and as he bent over me, the impressive lines of his muscles and abdomen came into full view. It was hard not to be captivated. After a moment, I pulled away, noticing the tips of his ears had turned red. My hand drifted down, almost of its own accord, to touch his stomach. I leaned in close to his ear, my breath warm against his skin. "Husband, you have a wonderful body," I whispered. "Now that you've said your piece, shouldn't we move on to the next part?" I felt a tremor run through his body. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice strained. I raised my eyebrows. "Exercising my rights as your wife. Is there a problem?" Feeling my challenge, a low laugh escaped him. In the next instant, he took off his glasses, and the cold demeanor vanished, replaced by a consuming, passionate fire, as he kissed me with an intensity that left no room for refusal. I felt like I was melting. As I drifted off to sleep much later, I had to admit the sheer difference in stamina between men and women. I was completely exhausted, but he had seemed tireless. The next day, I woke up to find it was already afternoon. A small jar of ointment was sitting on the bedside table, which I assumed Arthur had left for me. It was a thoughtful gesture. After taking a bath, I went downstairs to find something to eat. The butler respectfully handed me a secondary credit card linked to Arthur's account. "The young master said you can buy whatever you wish," he informed me. I took it with a smile. It felt incredibly good to have money without slaving away day and night, or having to grovel before investors. In my previous life, after marrying Julian, I had moved into a rundown rental house. His family preached about being thrifty and managing the household, but they spent money lavishly, quickly squandering the dowry I had brought with me. Looking at the clock, I figured Clara was probably married by now. My parents had told me I didn't need to attend her wedding. I wondered how she was feeling, facing that family of wolves. The thought made me feel that I should probably make an extra effort to please my new benefactor, Arthur. In the days that followed, I took on the role of the devoted wife. When Arthur ate, I served him his food. When he was tired, I gave him a massage. When he wanted to take a bath, I immediately went to draw the hot water for him. At first, he seemed uncomfortable with the attention. "I can do these things myself," he'd say. "How can I let you do this?" I'd reply. "You told me to be a good wife. My husband works so hard, of course I should take good care of him." The truth was, I felt a little guilty taking so much of his money without doing anything in return. He never responded directly, maintaining his cool expression, but I often saw the corners of his mouth turn up in a small, secret smile when he thought I wasn't looking. Sometimes I would also go to his company to bring him lunch. After my experience as an entrepreneur in my past life, I understood why so many executives had stomach problems. When you're busy, you genuinely don't have time to eat. One day in his office, I saw a female secretary in a low-cut shirt staring at him with an almost worshipful gaze. While we were eating, I casually remarked, "Your secretary is quite beautiful and she has a great figure." Arthur immediately understood my meaning. Without even looking at me, he just said, "Don't be unreasonable." I shot him a glare when he wasn't looking. But the next time I visited, I found he had replaced her with a male secretary. I heard the female secretary had been transferred to work for another executive. He was such an awkward, proud man. Just as I thought our relationship was improving, he suddenly started to avoid me. He began sleeping in the study every night, using work as an excuse. We used to have breakfast together, but now I barely saw him. Even I, who could be dense about these things, knew he was avoiding me. I had planned to wait for him at home one day to ask him what was going on, but a friend texted me an invitation to afternoon tea. When I arrived, I was surprised to find Clara was also there. The dazzling jewelry she used to wear was gone, and the handbag she carried was from last year's collection. It was clear she was struggling financially in the Julian household, but she kept a smile plastered on her face. It was only when she saw that my entire outfit was a limited edition that a flash of something ugly crossed her eyes before she quickly composed herself. When someone asked when she was planning to have a baby, Clara's smile faltered for a second. "My husband said not to worry about it," she replied smoothly. "He can't bear to see me go through motherhood at such a young age, so we won't consider it for a few years." Everyone immediately started praising Julian for being such a rare and wonderful husband. Seeing her performance, I knew Clara must have already realized the truth. Of course, Julian wasn't in a hurry. I suspected she would be the one in a hurry later. Noticing my barely suppressed smile, Clara shot me a fierce glare. Her eyes then fell on the red marks on my hands, and a triumphant smirk appeared on her face. "Sister, what happened to your hands? I heard Arthur has a bad temper. Did he hit you?" I looked down at the marks. They were indeed from Arthur, but not from him hitting me. They were from his tie. He was truly a beast in bed. The memory alone made me blush, which, in the eyes of the others, probably looked like guilt. Clara's mood improved even more. "Sister," she said with mock pity, "a marriage without love is truly pitiful." After the party, Julian arrived in a taxi to pick Clara up, which earned more envious sighs from the women around us. I had already called for our driver, but to my surprise, it was Arthur who came. I saw him sitting in the car waiting for me before I even stepped out of the building. Our eyes met, and I quickened my pace. As I walked past her, Clara suddenly stuck her foot out, tripping me. I stumbled, and a waiter nearby quickly helped me up. "Thank you," I said. And as I looked up, I saw that Arthur had gotten out of the car. His eyes were like ice as he stared at the waiter's hand on my shoulder. He strode over, looked me over to make sure I wasn't hurt, and then dragged me away without a word. His presence was so intimidating that no one around us dared to speak. They all just looked at me with sympathy. I saw Clara mouth the words, "Sister, good luck," as we left. In the car, Arthur didn't do anything aggressive. He just drove silently, his face slowly softening as the tense atmosphere in the car dissipated. It seemed he had managed to calm himself down. As soon as we got home, he started to head for the study. I couldn't stop myself from asking, "Aren't you staying in the master bedroom tonight?" He turned his head. The implication was obvious enough for both of us. He walked back to me, suddenly grabbing my waist and pulling me into his arms. A sickly, sweet, charming smile played on his lips. "Aren't you afraid of me?" he whispered. I raised my eyebrows and leaned in to kiss the pulse point on his neck. "Afraid of what? Let's try something new this time." Arthur's breath hitched, and the restraint in his eyes vanished completely. "Eleanor," he said, his voice husky, "don't you dare ask me to stop later." His hand then moved slowly to my shoulder, his voice turning cold. "Where did he touch you just now? Here? Or here?" So, he was going to settle the score after the fact. Before I could process what was happening, he bit my shoulder, hard. A soft moan escaped my lips, and he immediately lowered his head to kiss me, silencing me with a kiss so bewitching that I was completely lost in it. All I could do was cling to him tightly. In the middle of the night, I felt a hand gently stroking my cheek. "Eleanor," I heard him whisper in the dark, "you were the one who provoked me first. I won't hold back anymore. And don't you ever think of running away from me." After that night, Arthur began spending more and more time at home. He stopped sleeping in the study and insisted on holding me in his arms every night. From what Clara had said in our past life, I knew his study was filled with tools he used for self-harm, so I was naturally relieved that he was staying away from it. Sometimes, when he was deep in sleep, his head would unconsciously burrow into my arms, and he would rub against me, murmuring, "My love, love me more." It was such a stark contrast to the cold, self contained man he was during the day. According to Butler Chen, the head of the household staff, Arthur used to rely on a heavy dose of sleeping pills to get any rest. But since we had been together, he hadn't taken any. I was glad that I could help him in some small way. While Arthur was at work, I kept myself busy. Using my memories from my previous life, I took the money Arthur gave me, along with my dowry, and invested in several promising funds and stocks. I made a considerable amount of money in a short time, becoming a wealthy woman in my own right. To hell with being a strong woman. In this life, I just wanted to be a rich woman. Society places so many expectations and definitions on women, whether it's being a career elite or a dedicated housewife. But a woman shouldn't be defined by any of it. As long as I was happy, I could be whatever I wanted to be. Sometime later, I went back to my family's home to pick up some old belongings and happened to overhear my mother on the phone with Clara. From their conversation, I gathered that Clara had asked to borrow a significant amount of money, more than my mother could afford to lend her. Clara claimed she needed it as startup capital for a business and threatened that if even her own mother wouldn't help her, she might as well be dead. My mother, of course, eventually agreed. Hearing this, I lost interest and turned to leave. In my previous life, Julian had also asked me to borrow money from my family to start a business, but I had refused. A temporary handout can't provide long-term stability. If you want to build a good life, you have to be able to stand on your own. So, I had started with a small store, doing everything myself because I couldn't afford to hire anyone. Every investment I secured was the result of me drinking with clients and forcing a smile. And what was Julian doing at that time? He was at home, acting entitled, being lazy, and indulging in his addictions. Clara seemed to think that enough money would buy her freedom and turn her into the kind of powerful woman everyone admired. She didn't understand that there's no real freedom in this world. If you want to escape your cage, you have to rely on your own skills. I just didn't expect that, even with all her problems, she would still find the time to cause trouble for me. I don't know when it started, but rumors began to circulate that Arthur was a pervert and that I was being constantly abused at home. The marks on my body were said to be bruises from him hitting me. After little digging, I found out that my dear sister was the source of these rumors. The marks on my body were real, but they certainly weren't from being beaten. However, I couldn't exactly go around explaining to everyone how I got them. That night, I bit Arthur's shoulder hard in frustration. "Could you be a little gentler in the future?" I complained. "You have no idea what people are saying about you outside." He stopped what he was doing and gave a self-deprecating smile. "Maybe I really am a pervert," he said, then held me tightly. "If I am a pervert, will you leave me?" There was a faint, almost imperceptible note of fear in his voice. I lifted my head and kissed him. Who doesn't have some psychological issues these days? I have them too, so neither of us gets to judge the other. Over these past weeks, I had truly felt his kindness. He granted almost every request I made. For the first time in my life, I, who had never felt truly loved, was experiencing what it was like to be cared for. I had to admit, I was falling for him. Hearing my words, Arthur smiled, a look of genuine relief washing over his face. It seemed the thing he had been so worried about was, in my eyes, just a common problem. Because I cared about him, I wanted to understand him better. His body was covered in scars, including the faint, telltale lines of someone who had cut their wrists. I once gently asked him where the scars came from, but he didn't want to answer. When I pressed him, he would just kiss me fiercely to silence me. Eventually, I learned some of the truth from Butler Chen. Butler Chen was an old servant of the Arthur family and knew many of their secrets. He told me that when Arthur was 10 years old, he had been abducted. His parents had searched desperately for him, but to no avail. Eventually, they gave up and adopted a little boy from an orphanage, naming him Cain. 3 years later, against all odds, Arthur came back on his own. He was covered in blood and mud, with hollow eyes and matted hair. The servants mistook him for a beggar and tried to chase him away. It was Butler Chen who recognized him and rushed him to the hospital. At that moment, Arthur's parents were at a parent-teacher conference for Cain. When they heard Arthur had returned, their first instinct wasn't to rush to their son's side, but to comfort Cain, assuring him that his brother's return wouldn't change his place in their hearts, that he would always be their most outstanding son. Arthur heard every word of this from his hospital bed. After he came home, he was no longer the sunny, cheerful boy he once was. He became withdrawn and quiet. No one knew what horrors he had endured during those 3 years. When his parents noticed the change, instead of getting him psychological help, they accused him of being different, of no longer being close to them, of not being as good at pleasing them as Cain was. They poured all their affection onto Cain. At school, Cain led the other students in mocking and bullying Arthur. They spread rumors that Arthur was the adopted one, and Cain was the true heir. Finally, Arthur snapped. He beat up all the boys who had bullied him and even broke Cain's head open. Without finding out what really happened, his mother slapped him in front of everyone. After that, everyone believed it was Arthur's fault. No one at school dared to be his friend, though no one dared to bully him either. As he told me this, Butler Chen's eyes reddened with tears. "I watched the young master grow up," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "No one knows the pain in his heart. When he decided to take over the family business, I followed him without hesitation. I just didn't want him to have no one in his life who truly cared about him." I patted the old butler's back to comfort him, promising that I would take good care of Arthur from now on. As for parents like that, they weren't worth the emotional energy. It would be better to have nothing to do with them. However, a few days later, Arthur's mother called. He and I were in the middle of dinner when his phone rang. She was asking us to come to their house for dinner the next night, saying there was something important to discuss. Arthur didn't want to go, but they were insistent, so we decided to go. As soon as we walked in the door, we saw his parents and Cain sitting on the sofa, chatting and laughing. The moment they saw us, the smiles on his parents' faces vanished. Cain, however, put on a show of enthusiasm, greeting me warmly and complimenting me on how beautiful I looked. I just smiled faintly and nodded. After a few minutes of conversation, I got a taste of Cain's manipulative skills. His words were flattering, but his eyes were filled with a cold, calculating look. It was clear he was trying to win me over and turn me against Arthur. He would also occasionally gesture to the scar on his forehead, his words subtly implying that Arthur was a violent man who might hurt me. It turned out that when a boy plays the victim, he can be quite convincing. I smiled and fought back. How could that be? My husband only hurts bad people. An awkward silence fell over the room. The smile on Cain's face froze, and he walked away without another word to me. Later, Arthur's father was discussing company business with him when he suddenly changed the subject. "Your younger brother has graduated from university this year. Get ready to hand over your position to him. You can just assist him in the future." The family's company had been just an ordinary business a few years ago. It was solely through Arthur's hard work that it had grown into the powerhouse it was today. Hearing this, Arthur let out a cold sneer. "And why should I do that?" His father slammed his hand on the table. "Because I'm your father, and this company was founded by me. I can give it to whoever I want." "Then you can try," Arthur retorted, his voice dangerously calm. "Let's see if the current board of directors will listen to you or to me." His mother, enraged, walked straight over and slapped him across the face. "How could I have raised such a son, talking to your parents like this? I wish you had been killed by those traffickers and never come back." Arthur turned his head to the side, silent, his fists clenched at his sides. He didn't say another word, simply grabbed my hand and pulled me out of the house without us even staying for dinner. In the car, he was completely silent. I was trying to think of how to comfort him when he suddenly slammed on the brakes, parking the car on the side of the road. "I'm going to buy something," he said gruffly. "Wait for me in the car." He got out and walked away without waiting for a reply. A long time passed, and he didn't come back. Worried, I got out of the car to look for him. I walked for a while, but couldn't find any sign of him. I was starting to get scared and decided to head back to the car, but a group of thugs blocked my path. "Well, look what we have here," their leader sneered. "Why don't you come and play with us, little lady?" I tried to stay calm. "It's none of your business," I said coldly. He just laughed and reached out to put his arm around my shoulder. Don't play hard to get. We'll take good care of you. I dodged his arm and took a few steps back. If you don't leave right now, I'll call the police, I threatened. They weren't scared. They kept advancing as I backed away until my back was against a wall. I clutched the personal alarm in my bag, ready to use it. Just as they were getting closer, a large hand grabbed the leader's hair from behind and slammed his head against the wall. He screamed in pain as blood started to pour from the wound. It was Arthur. His eyes were bloodshot with rage. Before the others could react, he was on them, beating them to the ground with a savage intensity, his fists quickly becoming stained with their blood. They scrambled away in a panic. Arthur turned to me, where I stood frozen in shock, and sneered. Then he pulled me into his arms. Even if you're scared of me, I won't let you leave, he said, his voice rough. In this life, you can only be mine. I finally came to my senses and hugged him back. I'm not scared, I said, but you can't beat people up like that. He paused for a moment, then buried his head in my neck and let out a low, shaky laugh. Silly girl. My stomach chose that moment to growl loudly. I hadn't had dinner after all. Arthur's mood seemed to lift slightly. He took my hand and led me to a nearby restaurant. Later, I saw fresh scars on his hands and realized he had left the car to self-harm. He didn't want me to see him in that wretched state. He didn't want to die, but he couldn't control the urge to hurt himself. His psychiatrist had told him it was a form of extreme self-loathing. I took his small knife away and told him that from now on, he couldn't avoid me when he felt that way. We would face it together. He agreed. Arthur's parents called several more times asking us to come over, but we refused every time. A few days later, however, my own parents showed up uninvited, and they brought Clara with them. They claimed they had heard I was being abused and wanted to check on me. I had to sneer inwardly at that. If they really cared, wouldn't they have come sooner? As I suspected, after a few minutes of pleasantries, they revealed their true purpose. Clara wanted to borrow money from me. By my calculations, the Julian family had likely drained her of all her funds by now. The fact that she came to me meant she was truly desperate. Of course, she didn't admit any of this. She just said her business was expanding and she needed more capital. Naturally, I refused. Clara's expression immediately turned ugly. You have so much money you can't even spend it all, she spat. And your husband won't let you go out anyway. You might as well give it to me. I'm going to be a successful businesswoman. Don't blame me for not warning you, but when your husband finally goes completely crazy, your only family to fall back on will be us. Are you sure you want to burn this bridge? I just smiled faintly. Burn a bridge? Do you have any shame left? I thought you'd lost it all long ago. Clara was so angry she could only point at me, speechless. My father's face darkened. Eleanor, are you going to defy your own parents now? Sorry, I said calmly. I haven't wanted to listen to you for a very long time. My father raised his hand to hit me, but one of Arthur's bodyguards stepped in and stopped him. I then instructed the bodyguard to escort all three of them out. Clara was still cursing at me from the doorway, but my parents, embarrassed, dragged her away. It was the first time in my life I had ever stood up to my parents. I finally understood that being meek and obedient doesn't earn you respect. It only encourages people to treat you worse. Arthur came downstairs and hugged me from behind. He had heard everything. They made you angry, he said softly. Let me help you get rid of them. I shook my head. Evil people always bring about their own downfall. My mother called me again later, screaming at me that if I didn't help Clara, she would disown me. That's exactly what I want, I said, and hung up, blocking her number. Sometime later at a dinner party, I saw Clara again. She looked flushed and vibrant, and when she saw me, her smile widened. Sister, do you see? I don't need your help to succeed. My husband helped me get an investment from Mr. Sterling. The Julian family will be back on top in no time. I didn't say anything, just turned to look at Julian, who was standing beside her. You got an investment from Mr. Sterling? I asked. An undeniable look of smugness crossed his face, though he tried to cover it with a humble demeanor. I'm willing to do anything to help Clara, he said piously. I had to sneer. People can pretend for so long that they start to believe their own lies. Julian took Clara's hand. Mr. Sterling is over there. Let's go thank him. Before she left, Clara gave me a triumphant, provocative glance and whispered, "Anything you can do, I can do too." In my past life, I had also gotten an investment from Mr. Sterling, but by then, I knew what kind of man Julian was. I knew he didn't have the connections to secure such a major deal, so I was on my guard. Sure enough, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Sometimes the price is more than you can ever afford to pay. Arthur walked over and took my hand, a worried look on his face. "What's wrong?" I smiled and shook my head. "Nothing. These were all Clara's own choices. I just need to focus on my own path." The party lasted late into the night, and like most of the guests, Arthur and I decided to stay in the hotel overnight. The next morning, as I was getting ready to go down for breakfast, I heard Clara's voice coming from another room. "Julian, you bastard! You set me up. You used me to get that investment from Mr. Sterling. You're useless, so you just sell your own wife. You're not even human." Her words were followed by the sharp sound of a slap. Julian, however, showed no remorse, and I heard another slap, this one much harder. "Why else do you think he would invest in you?" He shot back. "It's not like you could borrow the money. Did I have another choice? I advise you not to make a scene. He has plenty of your photos now. If those get out, I can't help you." After saying that, I heard a door slam, leaving Clara alone. When she looked up from where she had fallen on the floor, she saw me standing in the hallway. She rushed at me, her face twisted in a vicious snarl, trying to grab me. "Why?" she screamed. "You clearly knew. Why didn't you tell me?" I easily dodged her attack. "It was your own choice, wasn't it?" I said calmly. She collapsed on the floor again and then started to laugh, a chilling, unhinged sound. "So, in the previous life, you went through the same thing I did. You're just as dirty as me. We're both dirty. Who's better than anyone?" She kept repeating it as if saying it would drag me down to her level and make her feel better, but my next words shattered her completely. "I didn't." Clara's eyes widened. "Impossible," she whispered. "In a situation like that, how could a woman like you escape?" "Because I'm tougher than them," I replied. She laughed again, a disbelieving, broken sound. "How is that possible? How can a woman be tougher than a man?" I didn't answer, just walked past her and left. In my past life, Julian had gotten me drunk and taken me to Mr. Sterling's room. But they didn't know that I had built up a high tolerance for alcohol from all my business dinners, and I had been suspicious of them from the start. As soon as I entered the room, I turned on the voice recorder on my phone. When Mr. Sterling tried to force himself on me, I fought back desperately. Julian just stood by the door watching. Mr. Sterling, thinking I was trapped, let his guard down, spewing all sorts of vile things. I grabbed a wine bottle from the table and smashed it over his head. I held the broken edge to his neck. "If you come any closer, you will die," I told him. He threatened me back. "If you kill me, your life will be ruined too. We'll die together." Maybe he saw something terrifying in my eyes at that moment, because in the end, he didn't have the courage to die with me and had to let me go. I had walked into the trap because I desperately needed that investment, and I knew I had to get something on him to secure it. It was a last-ditch effort, but I won. With the leverage from the recording, Mr. Sterling invested in my company, and it eventually became a success. But Clara wasn't brave enough. She didn't even have the courage to leave Julian because she couldn't bear to give up the investment she had sacrificed so much for. So she allowed herself to be threatened and controlled over and over again. And secrets like that never stay secret for long. Clara's reputation was soon in tatters. Everyone was whispering about her and Mr. Sterling. My parents were completely disappointed in her, feeling that her behavior had embarrassed them in front of their friends. People are drawn to success, so they gradually distanced themselves from Clara and started trying to get close to me. My relationship with Arthur, meanwhile, became more and more stable. He even publicly announced his decision to give me half of all his company shares. He came home immediately after work, turning down all social engagements. He was cold to everyone else, but his eyes would soften with tenderness whenever he looked at me. I became the envy of everyone again. Women would ask me for advice on how to manage their husbands, what tricks I used to make Arthur so devoted. A month later, Arthur and I attended an industry summit together. Clara and Julian were also there. Clara had lost all of her former arrogance. She looked haggard, and no amount of foundation could cover the bruises on her face. People around her were snickering, but she held her head high, chatting with others as if nothing was wrong. When she saw me, she looked right through me like I was a stranger. I certainly wasn't going to greet her. I never expected what she did next. She had someone drug the water a waiter brought me and had another person lure Arthur away. While I was in a daze, she took me to a room on the second floor. "Eleanor, don't blame me," she said, her voice shaking. "Why should you get everything good in both lives, while I get all the hardship? Mr. Sterling said that if I help him get you, he'll let me go. Just be good and sleep with him. It'll be over soon." She put me on the bed and ran out of the room. I forced my eyes open and saw a fat, big-bellied man approaching the bed. It was Mr. Sterling. I fumbled in my bag for the small knife Arthur used to use for self-harm. Just as he was about to touch me, I forced myself to stay conscious and stabbed the knife through his palm. He screamed, clutching his arm, "You have a knife, you bitch!" I collapsed onto the floor and cut my own arm with the knife. The sharp pain cleared my head a little. I stumbled out of the room and into someone's arms. I started to struggle, but a familiar voice said, "Eleanor, it's me." I looked up and saw Arthur's frantic, anxious face, and then I finally let myself pass out. When I woke up, I was in a hospital room. Arthur was sleeping in a chair beside the bed, holding my hand tightly. The moment I moved, he woke up and immediately went to call a nurse. He carefully gave me my medicine and then held me in his arms, refusing to let go. I stroked his head to comfort him. "Don't worry," I whispered. "I'm okay now." His voice was dark with fury. "Just thinking about that man wanting to touch you makes me want to chop off his hands." "Then, by your logic, no man can ever touch me again?" I asked. "Of course not," he said fiercely. "Eleanor belongs to me alone." "But you shook another woman's hand at the summit," I teased. "Should I be angry about that?" To my surprise, he nodded seriously. "That makes sense. Then you can chop off my hand as punishment." He actually handed me the fruit knife from the bedside table. When I didn't take it, he looked genuinely hurt. "You're not going to chop it off? Is it because you don't like me? You're not even angry that I touched another woman?" I couldn't help but sigh. "You're crazy." The next day, I learned from one of the bodyguards that after Arthur discovered I was missing, he had gone on a rampage, nearly shutting down the entire summit looking for me. After he found me, Clara tried to stop him, but he just kicked her to the ground. He sent me to the hospital and then had his bodyguards severely beat Mr. Sterling and his accomplices. If the summit's organizer hadn't stepped in, things would have gotten much worse. Clara was in the same hospital. After I'd recovered a bit, I went to see her. She couldn't get out of bed. "Are you proud of yourself seeing me like this?" she sneered. I sat on the sofa across from her. "This is the result of your own choices." She laughed, the sound becoming shrill and hysterical. "I just don't understand. We have the same background, the same parents. Why is it that whatever you choose, you succeed, and whatever I choose, I fail? I'm not reconciled. Why does God always favor you?" "God didn't favor me," I said calmly. "You were wrong from the very beginning. What's important has never been the choice itself, but the person who makes the choice." "Don't you just want to say I'm not as brave as you?" she sneered. I shook my head. "No. Your biggest mistake is that you always hope to get what you want through other people. You never think about achieving it through your own efforts. But every gift in this world has a price. You can't have everything. If you're too greedy, you'll suffer the consequences. The person who brought you to this point was never me." Clara just stared at me with wide, uncomprehending eyes. I got up and left without looking back, her almost insane voice following me down the hall. "You're lying! I didn't lose! You're lying!" After I was discharged, Arthur became even more attached to me. He blamed himself for what happened and wanted to take me everywhere with him. I heard from my father that after Clara was discharged, Julian divorced her. He was apparently pursuing the daughter of some newly rich family. Clara, they said, just babbled every day that she wasn't wrong, that she hadn't lost. My parents had no choice but to have her committed to a mental hospital. Of course, Arthur didn't let Mr. Sterling off easily. In less than a month, he had driven Mr. Sterling's company into bankruptcy. Mr. Sterling was saddled with a huge debt and was on the run until he was finally arrested for robbery and involuntary manslaughter. Later, I saw Clara on the news. She had somehow escaped from the mental hospital and stabbed Julian to death at his own wedding ceremony. When she was caught, she was still muttering, "It's all your fault." Because of her mental state, she wasn't sentenced to prison but was expected to spend the rest of her life in a psychiatric facility. After my mother heard the news, she called me from a new number, crying that I was the only one she could rely on now. I gave her a noncommittal answer and hung up. They raised me, so I would provide for them financially. But if they expected my love and care, they would be disappointed. I never received those things from them either. That winter, I found out I was pregnant. When Arthur learned the news, he was so happy he practically danced around the room, so excited he was almost afraid to touch me. I finally had to be the one to hug him first. Then he happily picked me up and spun me around. 10 months later, we had a lovely daughter. Arthur's parents wanted to see their grandchild, but we refused. Arthur looked at our daughter, his eyes filled with a deep, overwhelming tenderness. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I will do my absolute best to be a good father." I smiled and took his hand. "We both will," I said. Even though neither of us had ever known the love of our parents, our child would be the happiest child in the world.